What would you do if a man spat in your face just because of the color of your skin? And what if that man were the mayor of your city? This is the story of how an act of racism blinded a politician, unaware that the man he despised had once been a general in his country, a hero who had already faced much more than hate. What will happen when revenge comes with the truth? The sun was already beginning to set on the horizon, but the city of Yago still held its scorching heat. The streets were filled with vehicles and the bustle of pedestrians, but something in the air seemed foreboding, as if something big was about to happen. The mayor of the city, Ricardo Alvarez, known for his toughness and authoritarian demeanor, was taking a walk downtown to supervise the urban development projects. People eyed him sideways, some with respect, others with distrust. The townsfolk feared him, but few dared to speak against him. As he walked along the sidewalk, murmurs grew louder. People pointed at him, some opening their mouths to make malicious remarks about his exclusionary policies. The mayor, however, kept walking with a steady stride, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if the city belonged to him. He didn't care what people thought of him. Suddenly, a man with a weathered face and humble clothes, bearing a large scar across his cheek, approached him. He was a man of color, his presence noticeably distinct from the rest of the crowd surrounding the mayor. As soon as Alvarez saw him, he furrowed his brow, as if the mere sight of him made him uncomfortable. He was a man Alvarez preferred to avoid, an immigrant in a city that wasn't made for people like him. "Excuse me, Mr. Mayor," the man said, his deep voice calm, but with a spark of firmness. "I'm here to talk about the situation in the lower-income neighborhoods. People are suffering, the conditions are inhumane. You said you'd improve this, but—" "Improve?" Alvarez interrupted, lifting his gaze with a look of disdain. "What do you know about improvement, huh? Just take a look at how this place is, thanks to your kind. You have no right to ask me for anything." The man grimaced, but remained firm. "I'm not your enemy. I'm just seeking justice," he replied. Alvarez, feeling anger rise within him, let out a mocking laugh. "Justice for you, huh? Justice for those who sneak in and take what we've worked for? Don't play the martyr, my friend. This country isn't here for dirty people like you to come and ask for what doesn't belong to you." The mayor was so upset that he couldn't hear what the man was saying anymore. A crowd began to form around them, but no one dared intervene. At that moment, the man took a step forward, perhaps hoping something would change, but Alvarez's reaction was immediate. Without thinking, he spat as hard as he could into the man's face. The sound of the spit echoed in the air, and the crowd fell into a tense silence. The man stood still, tears of rage and humiliation welling up in his eyes. It was clear that the mayor didn't know who he was dealing with. No one knew. "Get out of here," Alvarez said coldly, looking away. The man didn't react immediately. He stood there, with the spit on his face, as the crowd began to murmur more loudly. Some laughed, others fell silent, but all watched expectantly. What they didn't know was that the man, the immigrant with scars on his face, had been a general in his homeland. A general who had fought in the war, a man who had served with honor and sacrifice. A man who, despite everything, never forgot what he had lived through. When the man turned around, he said nothing. He walked slowly, the spit still on his face, while the mayor, satisfied, turned to continue his walk, unaware that his actions would mark him for life. 2 days later, the mayor couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of that man, and the image haunted him, like a shadow that wouldn't disappear. He didn't understand why he had done what he did, why he had reacted so viscerally. The racism that had deeply resided within him had led him to do something he now regretted. The next day, the mayor called his advisors and asked them to investigate the man thoroughly. At first, the reports came in piecemeal, but when the mayor saw the man's military record, everything changed. That man had been a leader, a hero, and somehow, everything Alvarez thought he knew about him had been a lie he had built for himself. He wasn't just any immigrant. He was a former general of an army that had fought for his country, who had defended his people with blood, sweat, and tears. His name was Ricardo Hernandez, and discovering this, Alvarez felt the weight of guilt crush him. "What have I done?" he asked himself, staring at the face of that man, now so clear in his mind. The mayor Alvarez's regret was as deep as the contempt he had shown. However, he didn't know how to begin redeeming what he had done. The following days were tense, filled with nervousness and constant anxiety. Reports about General Hernandez arrived little by little, and soon, the news of the humiliation he had suffered began to leak out. The whispers of the city grew louder. People from the town started talking about what had happened, and the truth spread like wildfire. The first protest occurred at the Central Market. A group of citizens, angered and offended by the treatment of a man who had fought for his country, began demanding a public apology from the mayor. Indignation grew, and comments on social media became more virulent. Criticism of Alvarez multiplied. The racist mayor, a man without honor. We can't allow someone like him to keep governing. The protests began to gain strength, and people started demanding his immediate resignation. Alvarez tried to face the storm, calling a press conference where he offered a hollow apology, unsure of how to channel his regret. It was an impulsive act, he said, and I apologize to everyone who was offended. But his apology lacked weight. The community couldn't forget what he had done, and while he thought he could manage the crisis, the situation only intensified. On the other hand, Ricardo Hernandez, the man who had been humiliated in public, was at home, reflecting on what had happened. No one knew anything about him during those days. He had disappeared from the sight of the town. But inside, the pain and anger kept growing. The humiliation he had suffered was not something he could easily leave behind. No, he wasn't going to sit idly by. The people of the town didn't know his story, and he was going to make sure they did. Hernandez didn't need violence to take revenge. He didn't need it to demonstrate his power. Instead, he used the only resource left to him, the truth. For years, he had kept his story, his life as a soldier, silent, because after his exile, he had renounced war and everything related to it. But now, the time for hiding was over. The humiliation he suffered wasn't just something he lived through alone. It was his people, his community. The racism and contempt of Alvarez would not go unanswered. On a rainy afternoon, just after the mayor's public apology, Hernandez decided to appear before the town. He walked firmly, his face impassive, toward the main square, where a protest against him was taking place. The people were furious, but as soon as they saw him, the crowd fell silent. No one recognized him immediately until he introduced himself with a microphone in hand. I am Ricardo Hernandez, he said with a clear, deep voice. And I am not just any immigrant. I am not just a man you contemptuously call dirty or parasite. I am a man who fought for his country, and my sacrifice was never meant to be spat in the face. Hernandez's words cut deep. The crowd began to murmur, exchanging glances, feeling ashamed of the mayor's behavior. Those who had shouted at him before now felt the weight of shame. Alvarez knows nothing about honor. He knows nothing about what it means to risk your life for others. Hernandez continued. But you chose him, didn't you? You made him mayor. Now, I ask you to remember him every time you leave your houses. Remember what he did to a man who, because of his skin color, was seen as inferior. Remember his contempt for the lives of others. The people of the town began to change. That night, in their homes, in their bars, conversations about Alvarez turned more bitter. The anger that had grown in the people wasn't just because of the act of racism itself, but because someone so close to them had betrayed them with his attitude. Hernandez, however, was not finished. He wasn't content with being a spectator of the chaos that Alvarez had created. The next day, as Alvarez was leaving his office, he received a call on his mobile. It was a voice message. Ricardo Alvarez, I hope you know what you've done. This city doesn't want you, and now the truth is out. I want you to know something else. You didn't just humiliate me. You did it to an entire community. But I won't walk away empty-handed, and this town will learn what happens when you forget the dignity of a man. The voice said in the message. Alvarez, nervous, tried to ignore the threat, but he couldn't. The pressure was mounting. The calls from the press and the protesters outside his office wouldn't stop. The town had risen up, and what had started with an act of contempt and humiliation was now turning into a snowball that threatened to crush him. Days later, At a press conference where the mayor tried to give explanations, a journalist asked harshly, "How does it feel knowing that this town, which you claim to represent, is asking for your head? How does it feel to be a symbol of the racism you yourself sowed?" The mayor swallowed hard, but before he could answer, a large banner appeared at the back of the room, with Hernandez's face and the word revenge. A chill ran down his spine. The general, though he had been a victim, had already won the battle. The town was at war, and in that war, Alvarez had no future left.